the opposition leader to the, it was originally sent to the acting minister of national security. Will the acting minister be answered or the new minister be answered?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. It's Renee, and I will answer the question.
Good. Welcome, Minister. Good. Opposition Leader, could you put your question to Minister Lee?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to colleagues, and welcome to our new Minister, Ms. Mee. Welcome. My first question is, will the Honourable Minister please inform this Honourable House who was the party responsible for applying for a large group exemption from Prohibition and Regulation 5.1 and 2 of the Public Health COVID-19 Emergency Powers Regulations 2020 for a charity dinner for Meals on Wheels?
Sure.
Minister?
Sure. On June 30th, 2020, a letter dated June 26th, 2020 was received via email from MEF/Blue Restaurant applying for exemption for the 50-person limit for dinner reservations for 130 guests.
I'm sorry, I could just about hear.
Yeah, Minister, you did come a bit slow that time. You just speak a little closer to your mic. Or adjust your mic. Oops. Looks like we've lost Minister.
Sure.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Back now, Minister. Yes. You're back now. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker?
Yep. We see you clear. Can we?
I was saying, can you hear me now, Mr. Speaker? Yeah, I'm just trying to confirm if you can.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. On June 30th, 2020, a letter dated June 26, 2020 was received via email from MEF/Blue Restaurant applying for exemption to the 50-person limit for dinner reservations for 130 guests.
Thank you, Minister. Supplementary, Opposition Leader?
Yes, but clarification, the Honourable Member did say on June 30th. I'm not sure if she's saying that they received the application on June 30th, or that and in addition to that, the application was made on June 30th.
So before you put a question, you're trying to get clarification to an answer? Minister,
yeah.
Minister, can you just clarify that piece is asked?
Sure. The letter was received on the 30th of June, but it's actually dated June 26th.
Okay. Now, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do.
Supplementary.
Supplementary. Considering they received the application on June the 30th, was that application made on June the 30th approved?
Understand?
2 seconds.
No problem.
And if so, when?
I don't see that it was approved, Minister Kennedy. It may have been still being considered. So it wasn't.
Hey, are you still seeking the answer, Minister? Or?
No,
well, I'm just waiting for you to acknowledge me to come back.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, no, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. Okay.
Would you like to put a second supplementary now?
No, may I have a supplementary on that, Mr. Speaker, please?
Yes, Mrs. Leader, if you yield for your member, we'd like to put up supplementary. Go ahead, member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Member, Honorable Minister, congratulations. Could you let me know, you were saying that the application was not approved. It was not approved at all?
The letter dated June 26th, the application was not approved.
Second supplementary, Mr. Speaker?
Second supplementary?
Yes. Is the minister by saying the letter with the application was not approved, is that saying that the event was held without authorization?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, please.
Yeah, I was specifically asked if it was approved on the June 30th date, and that's the answer I provided was no, it was not.
Not on the June 30th date. If I can, for clarification, Mr. Speaker, I think the minister has perhaps misunderstood what the question was from my honorable leader. He didn't ask whether the letter was approved on the 30th of June. It was the request of the 30th of June approved, and if so, when?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Michael Scott. Sorry to intervene in this, but I understood the opposition leader to ask the minister whether the letter was approved. What was the date of the approval? And he was relating his question to whether the approval was on the 30th of June. That was my understanding.
Mr. Speaker, he's completely incorrect. And if you check the Hansard, my question was about the application itself. When was the application received? And then the supplemental, which she said was received on June the 30th. The supplemental question was thereafter. So let's not confuse this here. And so when I asked, when was it received? Then the following was, okay, well, was it approved? When was it approved?
Okay. Thanks. Members, I think we're clear. Let the minister handle it, please.
Okay. What you asked, when you asked me with reference to, if you're asking me the approval date, it was approved by the Minister of National Security on July 2nd, 2020.
So then my supplementary would be then.
Yes, second supplementary.
Was the application made on June 30th? The actual application that was approved on July the 3rd?
On the approval on July 2nd?
July 2nd. Was the actual application made on June 30th the same application that was approved on July the 2nd? Or whatever date you said it was approved?
I think she indicated that the request that received on the 30th was approved on the 2nd. That's the understanding I got from the response.
Mr. Speaker, if you allow me to help the member, he has a second question that needs answering, and it may help him with the first question.
Okay,
we'll move on.
Yep.
I have a supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary?
Yes.
It's a supplementary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Who was involved in the decision-making process to approve the application?
Mr. Speaker?
So you want?
Sorry. I think just for clarification, the question was simply who made the decision? Is that it? It's as simple as it was asked?
No, Mr. Speaker. Who was involved in the decision to approve the application?
It would have been the technical officers who vet the application, and then the Minister for National Security.
Thank you. Second supplementary.
Continue.
To the Honourable Minister.
were any other cabinet ministers consulted prior to the approval being given?
Minister?
It would have, the Ministry of Health.
I have a supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
What was the reason given in that application for the exemption requested by Blue Restaurant?
I think that's actually the second question that from the opposition leader. So if you could hold that and let the opposition put his question, there we can get the answer.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What was the reason given for requesting a special large group exemption?
On July 3rd, I'm sorry, on July 3rd, 2020, a follow-up letter dated July 1st was received via email from MEF Blue stating that the request for exemption was for charitable purposes to raise funds for charity organization Meals on Wheels.
Supplementary? Thank you, Minister.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
MP Pearman.
Okay, MP Fairman, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, welcome on your first day as a new minister in the House. My question for you is, you just stated that there was a follow-up letter received on Wednesday, the 1st of July from MEF stating the reason being charitable purposes. Was the reason stated in that follow-up letter of the 1st of July different from the original reason given in the letter of the 26th of June?
Yes.
This is my second supplementary. What was the reason given in the letter of the 26th of June?
The reason given was for dinner reservations for 130 people.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, if I may.
Yes, to supplementary.
Yes, the minister has indicated that there was just a general application for just a large gathering made on the 1st of July, received on the 30th of June from a letter of 6/26. Just a general gathering with no specific purpose.
Yes.
That's the first part of my question, Mr. Speaker. The question itself is, did the ministry then request specifics, or the technical officers request specifics to enable them to evaluate the request, the application?
Yes.
I have a supplement.
Supplementary?
I do, thank you.
Mr. Simons?
It is, yes.
Mr. Simons?
Did the department make contact with Meals on Wheels to confirm the event? And if they did, do you know whether to date they received any funds?
No,
No what?
No, they did not make contact.
And do you know if any funds were paid?
Is that a second supplementary now, Mr. Simons?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
What's your second supplementary?
Do you know if any funds were paid and accepted by Meals on Wheels?
No, I do not.
Okay. Ms. Kenner, do you want to do a supplementary?
I have a supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Who's that? Mr. Donkey?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to the Honorable Minister, the government committed into holding an inquiry into this matter. Can the Honorable Minister please update on what the status of the government inquiry is?
Mr. Speaker, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the Honorable former leader of the opposition, or former premier, is incorrect. The government did not commit to an inquiry. I committed to an inquiry. And upon my inquiry, we all know what the results, the action was.
Thank you, Mrs. Speaker. Mrs. Speaker, thank you. I have a supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
You have a second supplementary? Put your
Yes,
second
Mr. Speaker.
supplementary.
I thank the Premier for my laugh of the day. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister stated that the Minister of Health was consulted on this application. Did the Minister of Health or the Ministry of Health support this application?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, that would be unknown to me. That would have been a conversation with the previous minister and the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I have a supplementary.
Yes, Opposition Whip?
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Minister, I'm just curious whether the technical officers who received the request for the exemption, did they, when they went out, ask or specify that a reason had to be given that was charitable?
Did you get the answer there, Minister?
I said no.
Okay, thank you. Is there supplementary?
Mr. Speaker, back to the supplementary that I just asked.
You had your two supplementaries.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but the rules of question period allow for another minister to ask the question. So if the Minister of National Security is not aware, the Minister of Health can answer the question, Mr. Speaker.
That's quite all right, but
That's correct.
it is correct, but if the minister needed to have assistance, but I think it's just moving on okay right now.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the rules allow the minister to give an answer.
The rules state that another minister can. It doesn't say that another minister has to. It said if a question is put and the minister wants to yield to another minister, she can. That minister can. In this case, the minister has not yielded. She provided a response to the best of her knowledge.
Well, Mr. Speaker,
the standing order doesn't call on a second minister to have to respond.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Honorable Minister to yield to the Minister of Health?
No.
Okay, well, in
it's the option of the minister or the two ministers. If a minister says, I will yield to a second minister, or if another minister is prepared to, but it doesn't require someone to call on that second minister to act.
Accepted, Mr. Speaker, but in the spirit of transparency, I would expect that the minister would be able to do that.
And the minister is a new minister. This is her first day as minister. She's trying her best to provide the information. And I think if anyone has any other supplementaries, just continue to put to the minister.
Yeah, I have a supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, hold on a second. Shadow, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah.
I brought this concern to yourself that because we had put in questions and we knew that we had new ministers, I was concerned that they would not be able to answer all of the questions. And your answer to that was, well, standing orders allows for other ministers to be able to answer those questions. That was your answer to me. And so now that we have a minister who's just been appointed, unable to answer a question, we should be allowed to be able to ask any other minister that is involved to be able to answer a question. That was your ruling to me.
I did indicate that in the light of the fact that we had an acting minister at the time that you submitted your question, that if the acting minister felt that they needed to yield or get assistance from any other minister, the standing orders allows for it. In this case, the new minister is doing her best to answer the question. She has not yielded or asked for or sought that assistance yet. If she seeks that assistance, then it can be done. But she doesn't have to seek the assistance at the request of the persons asking the question. But the rules are there to allow, if another minister wishes to respond or is asked to respond by the minister, they can do it. If the law is provided, then they wouldn't be able to do it. But it isn't a request for the person asking the question to say, well, I want Minister A to answer because Minister B didn't give the answer that I liked.
Mr. Speaker, I raised the concern. I heard your answer very clearly. And what I'm hearing today does not match up to what you are meting out as your judgment on this case here. Not at all. Not even close.
Well, it may have been misinterpreted. What I was trying to say to you was purely that the rules allow us for other ministers to answer if the minister had yielded to calling for the other minister to assist. We haven't had that point. We haven't had that. So we'll continue on with the minister providing the answers.
Mr. Speaker, am I able to ask the minister if he will yield to the health minister?
No. If the minister, it's the minister's call. If the minister says, as she would like to, then she can.
Mr. Speaker, I have a supplement.
Yes, put your supplementary, please, Officer Webb.
Yes, well, was the Ministry of Health in agreement with this application for exemption?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, my response would actually be the same. I would not know that because it would have been a conversation with the previous minister and the minister of health.
Supplementary then, will the Minister of National Security then allow the Ministry of Health to answer the question whether they were in agreement with the exemption?
I think you're taking this back to a series of comments that have started this conversation.
Because it makes sense.
It's not a request, it's if the minister's prepared to yield.
I have a supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, which might help to put us back on track. The Honorable Minister just indicated that this was a conversation between two ministers, between the Minister of National Security and the Minister of Health. Is the minister suggesting that substantive decisions not reduced to writing so that she does not have the capacity to go back and look at the written content of the exchange of requests and responses?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, just looking through what I have heard, the act actually only requires the Minister of National Security to consult with the Minister of Health.
And Mr. Speaker, that's all we're asking is what was the result of the consultation? It's got to be there, Mr. Speaker. All of this, we can answer a question, we can move on. If the question is not answered, it seems like there's something that's underneath the surface, and we'll continue to ask questions.
Can I ask a supplementary then? Supplementary then? Mr. Speaker?
He's gone on mute.
Just restate that, please.
This is MP Atherton. Can I ask a supplementary?
Yes, you can ask the supplementary.
Okay. Is the minister, the now Minister of National Security, able to ask whether the former acting Minister of National Security, who would have been the person that was there while it happened, was he be prepared to answer the question?
Well, then you go even further against the orders of the standing orders. Questions asked to one minister may be answered by another minister or a junior minister. The former minister is no longer either a minister or a junior minister. So the former minister, if the former minister was a minister in another capacity, they could respond. But they're no longer a minister or a junior minister in any capacity.
Mr. Speaker, they are, in the sense that the question was put to Minister.
No. They are no longer a minister. Clear, end of the day. No longer a minister.
Let's move on. We have a third question.
And just to restate it so it's clear, under the standing orders 17 in reference to question. 1B states, and let me read it again because I've said it without reading it all this time. I said it from memory, but I'm going to read it so you all understand it clearly. Questions asked to one minister may be answered by another minister or a junior minister. And the key word is may. It isn't a request by the floor to ask for another minister to assist.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's very clear. I think we understand that. But if the government wants to be open and transparent, the Minister of Health is on the call. She can easily answer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Dunkley, I made my ruling. And let's be clear about that.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I respect the ruling too. Just pointing out something else. I respect the ruling.
That need to be pointed out.
Did we have a third question, Mr. Speaker, or do we have a supplementary on the table?
The opposition leader asked this question, and he never quite put up supplements. Everybody else put in supplements. So the opposition leader, do you have a supplementary? If not, we can move on to the questions from statements this morning.
I'm sure that there probably, I do have supplementaries, but there's others that may have some supplementaries as well. Considering that supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, considering the restaurant put in the application, can the Honorable Minister explain the process of determining what is exceptional circumstances?
Minister?
Yep, I'm here, Mr. Speaker. Just looking through my paperwork. Hold on 1 second. Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Minister?
Okay. The exceptional circumstances are actually at the minister's discretion. Can be approved at the minister's discretion.
Thank you. Do you have another supplementary?
Second supplementary?
Yes.
Yes. Minister, consider it unusual for the restaurant to be applying for an exceptional circumstance when they were not the ones hosting this dinner.
Minister?
I'm sorry, what was the question in that?
Could you restate your question, opposition leader?
Yes. Would the minister consider it unusual that the restaurant that is basically serving dinner and drinks, would the Honorable Minister consider it unusual that they applied for this exceptional circumstance license as opposed to the host of the dinner?
Minister?
I'll answer this one, Mr. Cannoneer, to the best of my ability, but no, because they would have needed to ensure that the health precautions were followed on behalf of the restaurant.
Thank you.
I have a supplementary.
Supplementary?
Yes, Madam Minister, could you indicate to me, based on what you said in terms of how the application came in, is it unusual when the application is actually gazetted for the charity to be actually listed if it wasn't in the application, the original application from MEF?
Thank you. You understand?
Can you just say? Can you repeat that, Ms. Atherton? You just said is what was unusual because it kind of went out.
Okay, so you indicated that MEF applied for an exemption for the 150 dinner reservation for 130. You didn't indicate that they told you why they needed it, what the charity was, but yet the application in the paper listed the charity. Was it in the original MEF application? And if not, why was it in the gazetting of the application?
I think some of that has been answered earlier in questions. Shadil said the application that received on the 26th, or the letter that was written on the 26th, received on the 30th, did not indicate the charity. It just indicated a request for an exemption, my word.
Well, then
And then
that's why and I thought that's what I heard, but then that's why my question was, why then in the gazetting of the application was a charity listed if it wasn't in the application?
Because they stated that there was a letter that came in on the 2nd of July that indicated that it was for a charitable event.
So then there's another application on July 2nd?
So there was, Mr. Speaker, I can answer that.
Yes, go ahead.
There's one letter dated June 26th, and there was a second letter, I'm just referring to Mr. Kennedy's second question, dated July 1st, and that letter speaks to the charity.
Okay, thank you. I have a supplementary, Mr. Speaker, please.
Honorable Deputy Opposition Whip, Leader. Sorry, go right here, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can the minister provide what the detailed investigation conducted by the Ministry of Health entailed that led her to draw to the conclusion that Blue needed to be closed for 14 days?
Number, let me advise, that's outside of the scope of the original question. The original question was around the granting of the license prior to the event. And the question you're asking is speaking to events that have taken place after the event.
Okay.
Question, but not for this time. It can be put in at another time for another occasion, but not for this occasion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I have a supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary?
Yes, please, sir. The minister has indicated that the charity itself was not informed prior to, but would the charity have been informed subsequent to the letter coming into the ministry?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I did not indicate that the charity was not informed. I said the charity was not mentioned in the first letter and it was mentioned in the second letter.
Okay, I apologize. I misunderstood. Thank you for the clarity, Minister.
Any further supplementaries? No further supplementaries. We can move on to the statements, questions and statements today. Beg your pardon?
Was that the third question by the opposition leader?
Yeah, I had two questions on this one.
Okay, all right, thank you,
There's
sir.
no third. Okay, we'll move on to statements from the questions for statements. The first statement this morning